My immense army marched into Babylon in peace, and I did not countenance any menace throughout the whole of Sumer and Akkad. I soothed their fatigue. I released them from bondage. Marduk was pleased. Cyrus Cylinder, lines 24 to 26. These are the words of Cyrus the Great, king of Persia, recounting his legendary conquest of Babylon. But the path to this peaceful entry was paved with strategic plotting, military might, and the discontent of a subjugated people. From your servant Gorias, satrap of Assyria, to the great king of the world, Cyrus, I report that the affairs of Mesopotamia are in accordance with your will and desire. Nabonidus, the foolish king of Babylon, rules with tyranny. He shows contempt for Marduk, the god of Babylon, and this conduct has provoked the discontent of the people, especially the priests. In contrast, the people praise your name and even long to serve you. For this reason, the army of Babylon cannot take any action against you. I therefore advise that once the eastern lands have been pacified, you march against Nabonidus, who earlier allied himself with the king of Lydia and the pharaoh of Egypt against you. Between 546 and 540 BC, Cyrus the Great succeeded in bringing the eastern territories, as well as the Greeks of Asia Minor, under his authority. With the eastern front secured, Cyrus now set his sights on conquering the kingdom of Babylon. The Babylonians, having earlier allied themselves with Egypt and Lydia, had made their enmity toward Persia plain, and now the time had come for Cyrus to end once and for all the threat they posed. By 540 BC, it was evident to all that a great war between Babylon and Persia was imminent. Nabonidus, who until then had resided in Arabia, hastened back to his throne upon hearing of Persian movements and issued orders for the mobilization of troops. He also brought the statues of the gods from various Mesopotamian cities into Babylon to shield them from the ravages of war. He then appointed his son, Belshazzar, as commander of the army to confront the Persians in battle. Since the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, the Babylonians had lived with the lingering fear of an invasion from the Iranian plateau. Anticipating such a threat, their kings ordered the construction of a vast defensive wall between the fortresses of Opis and Sippar, a barrier that came to be known as the Median Wall. This colossal structure shielded Babylon from any assault coming from the north. For this reason, if Cyrus the Great sought to bring Babylon under his dominion, he would have to test the southern routes instead. In the spring of 540 BCE, by the command of Cyrus, a reconnaissance detachment of Persian soldiers departed from Susa, heading toward Mesopotamia to explore a possible route to Babylon. When the Persians reached the Babylonian frontier, they encountered a local scouting force. A brief clash followed. Reinforcements were dispatched. Yet, the Persians gained little ground. Reports soon revealed that the Babylonians had heavily fortified their southern approaches. Any invasion from that direction was impossible. Cyrus made his decision. He would march north. Leading the army himself, and accompanied by his eldest son Cambyses, Cyrus advanced toward the northwest. Ahead of them loomed the greatest obstacle of all, the Median Wall and the twin strongholds of Opis and Sippar. Here, Cyrus displayed the brilliance that would define his campaigns. To bypass the Babylonian defenses, he directed his army toward the Gindiz River, intending to cross the shallower branch of the Tigris, outflank the Median Wall, and draw the Babylonian army into open battle. But when the Persians reached the river, Cyrus was met with an unexpected challenge. The Gindiz was far deeper than he had anticipated. Determined not to turn back, he ordered his engineers to act. On both banks, they dug 180 channels, diverting the waters and lowering the river's depth until the troops could cross. The plan succeeded, but at a cost. The long delay robbed Cyrus of the element of surprise. With winter setting in, he was forced to suspend the campaign and wait for the coming of spring. With the coming of March, the Persian host once again marched along the same route toward the heart of Mesopotamia. On the other side, King Nabonidus, aware of the Persian advance, divided his army. A smaller contingent remained with him inside Babylon, while the main force under the command of his son Belshazzar moved north to Opis, charged with stopping Cyrus's progress. As the Persian army pressed westward, Cyrus dispatched a royal messenger to Gorias, governor of Gutium, ordering him to join the campaign with all his forces. Gorius obeyed without hesitation and marched south. Once his troops joined the main army, Cyrus crossed the Tigris and advanced swiftly to meet the Babylonian host that had marched out to confront him. In late summer of 539 BC, the armies of Babylon and Persia confronted one another. Unfortunately, our sources provide little detail of this battle, and thus we are compelled to reconstruct it based on our knowledge of the military tactics employed by both sides. Belshazzar arrayed his army upon the plain before the city. He divided his forces into 3 parts. In the center stood the infantry, with archers positioned behind them. On the flanks, Belshazzar stationed his cavalry. Cyrus the Great adopted a similar formation. In the center, he placed the Persian infantry, capable both of archery and of close combat. Behind them stood siege towers, upon each of which 100 archers were stationed. Cyrus stationed his terrifying scythed chariots on either side of his infantry at a short distance from the center, with his cavalry placed farther out to support the chariots. Cyrus himself commanded the center of the army. On the right wing stood his son Cambyses, while Gorius was positioned on the left. Once both armies had formed their lines, they advanced slowly toward one another. At Cyrus's command, the cavalry, as they moved forward, gradually increased their distance from the center. This maneuver compelled Belshazzar to issue a similar order to counter the Persian horsemen. By this stratagem, Cyrus cleverly drew the Babylonian cavalry farther and farther away from the heart of their army. When the archers of both armies came within range, the front rank of the Persian host, who carried large wicker shields, advanced a short distance, planted their shields into the ground, and thus created a barrier to protect the infantry against enemy arrows. Thanks to their superior skill in archery and the siege towers they had brought onto the battlefield, the Persians proved far more effective than the Babylonians in long-range combat. The number of Persian bowmen was also much greater, causing the Babylonians to suffer heavy casualties and lose their order. Meanwhile, the Persian cavalry charged swiftly against the Babylonian horsemen. A fierce clash of riders ensued. With the Babylonian cavalry fully engaged, Cyrus gave the order for his scythed chariots to advance. From both flanks, they struck into the Babylonian center, cutting down many in their path. As the chariots tore through the enemy lines, the Babylonian infantry was thrown into severe disorder. At this moment, the Persians laid aside their bows, seized their spears, and charged upon the Babylonians. With each passing moment, the Babylonians found themselves in a worse position. The heart of their army was pressed on 3 sides, and their surrender seemed imminent. Belshazzar, realizing that if the battle dragged on, his defeat would be certain, immediately ordered a retreat into the fortress of Opis. The Babylonians withdrew in haste and took refuge within its walls. The Battle of Opis ended with heavy losses for the Babylonians. Yet, since some of them had secured themselves within the fortress, the Persians were obliged to confront them once more. Cyrus divided his forces into 2 parts. One portion under the command of Gorius was sent toward Babylon to lay siege to the city and prevent reinforcements from arriving, while Cyrus himself remained with the rest of the army to besiege the fortress and bring Belshazzar to an end. The text of the Nabonidus Chronicle at this point requires careful interpretation because of repeated damage to the tablet, the brevity of its phrases, and the nuances of Akkadian vocabulary. Translations often differ significantly on crucial details. For example, after Cyrus's victory at Opis in 539 BC, the text may be read as saying that he defeated the Babylonian army, or, in some versions, that he slew or even slaughtered the Babylonian people. Each translation imparts a distinctly different character to Cyrus's triumph. The interpretation of Cyrus's actions depends heavily on the context in which the Akkadian words are rendered. Some historians have suggested that in Persian practice, if a city surrendered without resistance, it would be spared and its status preserved. But if the inhabitants resisted, they would be punished severely. This principle seems to hold true in the Persian conquests of Asia Minor against the Greeks and may also explain the events here. Violence may have been employed because the city resisted. In any case, after the fall of Opis, Cyrus led his army toward another Babylonian fortress beyond the Median Wall. There, however, he achieved success without a fight. According to the Chronicle, a large group of the city's inhabitants came out to greet the Persian king in welcome. Meanwhile, in the south, Gorius had already reached Babylon itself and placed the city under siege. Gorius hastened to the city of Babylon and, in accordance with Cyrus's instructions, immediately set to work. He divided his army into two parts. One was stationed at the point where the Euphrates entered the city, and the other where it flowed out. Meanwhile, the labourers and engineers who accompanied Gorius began digging canals to divert the Euphrates. Making use of channels that earlier Babylonian kings had cut in order to lower the river's depth, they redirected its waters into an artificial basin, which by now had become a marsh. This operation drastically reduced the depth of the river until the Persian soldiers could wade through it with ease. When the water level had fallen, the Persian troops entered the river and made their way into the city along its course. By Cyrus's order, the soldiers were forbidden to harm the inhabitants. They dispersed through Babylon seeking Nabonidus with the aim of securing a swift and bloodless victory. The Persian operation was so swift and unexpected that some of the inhabitants in the city centre were entirely unaware that the Persians had already entered. The Babylonian soldiers, seeing that resistance was futile, laid down their arms before the Persians and surrendered. In keeping with Cyrus's command, Gorius did them no harm. Instead, he demanded that they reveal the hiding place of Nabonidus. It appears that Nabonidus had fled Babylon shortly after the Persians entered the city. Thus, on the 12th of October in 539 BC, the city of Babylon fell to the Persians without bloodshed. Gorius was able to take the city of Babylon with ease, in full accordance with the instructions of Cyrus the Great. Though Nabonidus escaped his grasp, Gorius immediately pursued the fugitive king and captured him before he could reach Nippur. Returning to Babylon, he prepared the city for the entry of Cyrus. On the 29th of October 539 BC, Cyrus the Great entered Babylon with his eldest son. The people of the city, in celebration of the new year and the arrival of the great king, held a magnificent festival. They came forth to greet Cyrus and his companions, scattering flowers before their path. With heartfelt devotion, they hailed the great king, overjoyed beyond measure, believing Cyrus to be the chosen one of their god, Marduk. On the 29th of October 539 BC, Cyrus the Great entered Babylon with his eldest son. The people of the city, in celebration of the new year and the arrival of the great king, held a magnificent festival. They came forth to greet Cyrus and his companions, scattering flowers before their path. With heartfelt devotion, they hailed the great king, overjoyed beyond measure, believing Cyrus to be the chosen one of their god, Marduk. By Cyrus's command, the statues of the gods that had been seized from other cities and brought to Babylon were restored to their sanctuaries. Temples that had fallen into neglect under Nabonidus were repaired. The Jews and other peoples who had been brought to Babylon as captives in the time of Nebuchadnezzar were liberated and returned to their homelands at Cyrus's expense. Toward Nabonidus, the defeated Babylonian king, Cyrus acted with kindness, appointing him as satrap of Carmania. Here was the ethos and approach of King Cyrus. Unlike the kings before him, he showed compassion toward all people and ruled with justice. After Cyrus gained control of Babylon, the peoples of the other cities and lands that had once belonged to the Babylonian kingdom heard of his justice and became devoted to him. They sent their envoys and ambassadors to Babylon with precious gifts, proudly declaring themselves servants of the great king of Persia. In Babylon, Cyrus formally appointed Cambyses as his successor, entrusting him for 1 year with the satrapy of Babylon and the lands beyond the Euphrates as his regent. After the year had passed, this office was transferred to Gorius, the capable Persian commander. Yet the joy of Babylon's conquest did not last long for the house of Achaemenes. In the month of March 539 BC, Queen Casandane, the beloved and faithful wife of Cyrus the Great, passed away. In her honor, Cyrus arranged a magnificent funeral ceremony to commemorate her loss. Between 539 and 530 BC, Cyrus was engaged in the affairs of governance. He introduced intelligent innovations and reforms in the administration of the empire, extending order throughout his dominions. But at the beginning of 530 BC, grim news reached the great king from the eastern frontiers. A confederation of Scythian tribes known as the Massagetæ had crossed into imperial territory, raiding and plundering. Cyrus, who according to some sources was 50 years old at this time, while others claimed 70, gathered his army to march against these foes.